the silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape.
Hello, welcome back, horror enthusiasts, to another spine-chilling episode of Real Talk Horror Edition. I'm your host, Josh, and today we're delving into the deep, shadowy corners of psychological horror with one of the most iconic films in cinematic history. We're in part 3 of our series, Trauma and Transformation, a section that's all about the horror born from deeply personal struggles. These are the films that take raw human emotions, grief, trauma, family conflict, and turn them into something deeply unsettling, yet utterly fascinating. The beauty of this category lies in its ability to connect with us on an intimate level. These films often make us uncomfortable, not necessarily because of what we see, but definitely because of what we feel. The fears we harbor, the memories we suppress, and the vulnerabilities we rarely acknowledge. And the perfect example of this subgenre is maybe more of a thriller, but it's the 1991 psychological thriller, The Silence of the Lambs. This film was a game changer, directed by the late Jonathan Demme, and based on Thomas Harris's best-selling novel, The Silence of the Lambs earned its place in history as one of few horror films to sweep the Oscars, winning Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, and Best Adapted Screenplay. But beyond its accolades, it's a film that redefined what horror could be. The Silence of the Lambs is a psychological cat and mouse game, but it's also so much more. It's a chilling exploration of the human psyche, a dissection of power dynamics, and a masterclass in tension. It introduced us to two unforgettable characters, Clarice Starling, the determined FBI trainee brilliantly played by Jodie Foster, and Dr. Hannibal Lecter. Now, I know some of you are saying, well, what about Manhunter and Brian Cox? Yes, but he wasn't the icon that he became, or that he is, until this point, when he was played with this whole level of sophistication by Anthony Hopkins. And let's not forget the context in which this film was released. In the late 80s and early 90s, horror was the slasher films and the supernatural tropes. Then, The Silence of the Lambs arrived, merging the crime thriller and the horror genres while grounding its terror in psychological realism. It was smart, sophisticated, and it was so terrifying because you believed it could actually happen. Now, before we get into the psychological depths of the film, let's set the stage real quick with a basic overview of the plot. So as we know, Silence of the Lambs follows young Clarice Starling, an FBI trainee who's given a daunting assignment: track down a serial killer known as Buffalo Bill, whose gruesome crimes have been baffling investigators. To do so, she first must seek insight from Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a brilliant psychiatrist who also happens to be a convicted murderer and cannibal. As the story unfolds, Clarice and Lecter engage in a series of chillingly intimate conversations. Lecter probes into Clarice's past and psyche, unearthing her vulnerabilities, while offering cryptic clues about Buffalo Bill's identity. Their interactions are like a psychological chess match, with Clarice trying to outwit Lecter while wrestling with her own demons. Meanwhile, the hunt for Buffalo Bill becomes increasingly urgent, leading to one of the most suspenseful climaxes in film history. From the very first scene, this film hooked me. My initial impression was absolute awe. I was struck by its intelligence, its refusal to rely on cheap scares, and its ability to keep me on edge through sheer psychological tension. This film was a rare find in that it was so masterfully balances horror and depth, but it does just that. So, are you ready to unravel the psychological layers of this haunting tale? Well, let's dig deeper. Let's begin by diving into the rich psychological tapestry of The Silence of the Lambs. This is a film that masterfully weaves complex themes into every chilling interaction and plot twist. This is where the true horror of the film resides, not in jump scares or gore, but in the psychological games and moral ambiguities that haunt both the characters and us in the audience. At the heart of the film lies Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a character who redefines what it means to be terrifying. Lecter isn't just a villain, he's a puppet master. With his unparalleled intellect and his razor-sharp insight into human nature, he's able to manipulate everyone around him. His captors, his fellow prisoners, and as we find out, most notably, Clarice. The dynamic between Lecter and Starling is mesmerizing. Lecter uses his chilling charm and his psychological acumen to probe into Clarice's deepest vulnerabilities. He doesn't just answer her questions. He dismantles her defenses piece by piece, exposing her fears and insecurities. Yet this isn't a one-sided game. Clarice is able to hold her ground, refusing to cower under his gaze. Their exchanges are a battle of wits, where every word and gesture is a weapon. And I think something that's particularly fascinating is how Lecter wields trust as both a tool and a trap. He offers Clarice critical insights into Buffalo Bill's psyche, but always at a cost. Each revelation draws her deeper into his web, making her, and us in the audience, question whether she's being helped or manipulated. Another compelling aspect of Silence of the Lambs is its ability to blur the lines between good and evil. At first glance, Lecter is a monster. He's a cannibalistic killer who should be nothing but abhorrent. Yet as the story unfolds, we see glimpses of something disturbingly human in him. Lecter's intellect and cultured demeanor contrast sharply with his violent nature, creating a character who defies any easy categorization. He's able to show genuine respect for Clarice, even offering her guidance and protection in his own twisted little way. Is this a hint of redemption or just another layer of manipulation? The film never really gives you definitive answers. It leaves us to wrestle with our own perception of morality. But this ambiguity extends beyond Lecter. The narrative forces us to confront uncomfortable questions. What makes someone a monster? Is it their actions, their intentions, or is it something altogether deeper? By challenging these moral binaries, the film keeps us on edge, unsure of whether or where our sympathies should actually lie. Clarice Starling is one of the most emotionally rich protagonists in the history of the psychological horror genre. Her strength lies not in physical dominance, but in her resilience and intelligence. But beneath her composed exterior, Clarice is obviously haunted by trauma. Her childhood experiences, particularly the title, that harrowing memory of hearing lambs being slaughtered, became a central metaphor for her character. It's this trauma that drives her, shaping her determination to save others from suffering. It also makes her a perfect foil for Lecter, whose calculated detachment contrasts sharply with her emotional vulnerability. The relationship between Clarice and Lecter is a study in contrasts. Where Clarice is guided by empathy and a desire for justice, Lecter is a cold, analytical observer of human nature. Yet their interactions reveal an unexpected connection, a mutual respect that blurs the line between adversary and ally. Now, while Lecter dominates the psychological tension of the film, Buffalo Bill embodies a more visceral kind of horror. Bill is the ultimate fear of the unknown, an enigmatic killer whose motives and methods are both grotesque and incomprehensible. Buffalo Bill is so terrifying because of his inscrutability. Unlike Lecter, whose intellect and motivations we come to understand, Bill remains an enigma. His crimes are horrifying in their brutality, but his psyche is equally unsettling. The film offers glimpses into his disturbed mind, but never enough to fully explain his actions. And his lack of understanding makes him even more frightening as he becomes a symbol of chaos and the darkness that lurks beyond the edge of our comprehension. Together, though, these themes, the manipulation, ambiguity, the character depth, and that fear of the unknown, create a film that is as intellectually engaging as it is absolutely terrifying. The Silence of the Lambs doesn't just scare you. It digs under your skin and it forces you to confront the darker aspects of human nature. This is what psychological horror is all about. Something that continues to resonate and stick with you long after you've left the theater or you've turned on the lights. One of the many reasons The Silence of the Lambs remains a masterpiece is its masterful crafting of atmosphere and tone. Every element, from the visuals to the sound to the setting, all work together to create an experience that is unnerving and unforgettable. Let's take a minute to break each of these down. First, Jonathan Demme's direction is a study in how to create psychological tension through cinematography. One of the most striking techniques he employs is the use of close-ups, particularly during the interaction between Clarice and Lecter. These aren't just any close-ups, they are extreme, breaking the traditional barrier of personal space. Lecter's eyes seem to pierce through the screen, staring directly into our soul, as if he knows our deepest fears and secrets, and it's captivating and deeply unsettling. And then there's the choice of the color palette that plays a significant role. Dark, muted tones dominate the film, emphasizing a world steeped in death and darkness. The somber hues reflect the gravity of Clarice's task and the malevolence of the forces she's up against. But there's also a striking contrast, the sterile white of Lecter's cell. While it initially seems clean and controlled, it quickly feels suffocating and oppressive, reinforcing the idea that appearances can be deceiving, which is another central theme of the film. Lighting here is another key player, because shadows loom large, especially in Buffalo Bill's scenes. They're symbolizing the hidden, monstrous aspect of human nature. In Clarice's world, light often feels just out of reach, as though she's constantly on the verge of uncovering something terrible lurking in the darkness. And then Howard Shore's score is nothing short of haunting. The music is subtle, never overpowering the scenes, but always working in the background to heighten the tension. The score's low, rumbling strings and ominous crescendos mirror Clarice's growing unease as she ventures deeper into the psychological and literal labyrinths of the case. Then there's the sound design. Dr. Hannibal Lecter's voice is a masterpiece of audio engineering and acting. Anthony Hopkins speaks with a calm, measured tone, almost like a lullaby, but with a razor-sharp edge that hints at the chaos beneath his polished surface. The infamous moment when Lecter describes his chilling meal of fava beans and an iced Chianti is elevated by that slithering, snake-like hiss he adds at the end. It's not just a line, that's an auditory shiver that really lodges itself in your brain. The use of silence is just as important as well. In many key scenes, the absence of sound amplifies the tension. When Clarice is in Buffalo Bill's pitch-black basement, the lack of a soundtrack leaves us alone with our own heartbeat, mirroring Clarice's terror and her disorientation. And all the settings in Silence of the Lambs are important in their own right. Take Lecter's cell, for instance. It's not just a room, it's a psychological battlefield. The stark, white walls and glass enclosure give it a clinical, surreal quality. It's a place where Lecter holds all the power, despite being physically confined. The sterile environment only heightens the contrast between his sophisticated demeanor and his horrifying nature. Then there's Buffalo Bill's house, which just creates nothing but dread. The labyrinthine-like basement with its low ceilings, the tight corridors, and macabre decor feels like a descent into the underworld. It's a place where every shadow hides a nightmare, and every step takes you closer to danger. The infamous pit where his victims are kept is the stuff of pure horror, dank, dark, and hopeless. It's the physical manifestation of the psychological trap Clarice is trying to escape. Even the outdoor settings carry a weight of unease. Clarice's journey through rural landscapes and desolate towns reflects her isolation and the grim nature of her quest. There's no sanctuary, no place of comfort, only the ever-present shadow of death. Together, the cinematography, sound design, and setting create a world that's both real but otherworldly. It draws us into the story that's as much about the psychological horrors we face internally as it is about the external threats that haunt us. And it's this careful construction of atmosphere and tone, I think, that keeps The Silence of the Lambs stuck in your head. All right, now let's take a look at the complex character dynamics that I think make this truly a masterpiece. From the protagonist to the villains and the supporting cast, every character in this film is crafted with depth and precision, and they create a world where the human mind itself becomes a battlefield. At the heart of this story is Clarice Starling, portrayed with nuance and depth by Jodie Foster. Clarice is a remarkable protagonist, a young FBI trainee determined to prove herself in a world dominated by men. But I think what sets her apart is the emotional depth that Jodie Foster brings to the narrative. Clarice's determination is rooted in her past, specifically her childhood trauma. Growing up as an orphan after her father's death, she's carried the weight of loss and the scars of vulnerability. These experiences fuel her drive to succeed, but they also leave her haunted, adding this compelling duality to her character. She's both incredibly strong, but still deeply vulnerable. It's a combination that makes her relatable and fully human. And her vulnerability becomes a strength in her interactions with Hannibal Lecter. Unlike other FBI agents, Clarice doesn't approach Lecter with arrogance or force. She's honest and unguarded, which intrigues him. In this dynamic, it allows her to access a side of Lecter that others can't, proving her resilience and adaptability. She's not just chasing a killer. She's fighting to overcome her own fears and insecurities, making her journey intensely personal. Now, let's talk about the film's antagonist, or antagonists, since we have two of them here, starting with the iconic Hannibal Lecter. Anthony Hopkins' portrayal of Lecter is nothing short of mesmerizing, blending intelligence, charisma, and a chilling lack of empathy. Lecter isn't just a villain, he's a psychological mystery. He doesn't need physical force to terrify. His words alone are enough to unnerve both Clarice and us. His intellect makes him unpredictable, and his ability to dissect psyches with surgical precision is just terrifying. One moment, he's offering helpful insights. The next, he's delivering lines like his famous, I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti, with a calm detachment that sends chills right down your spine. Lecter is even more compelling because of his fascination with Clarice. He respects her intellect and courage, and it creates a strange, symbiotic relationship. Lecter becomes both an adversary and an unlikely ally, and that's a weird dynamic that blurs the lines here between good and evil. But in contrast to that, Buffalo Bill represents unbridled madness. Played by the great Ted Levine, Buffalo Bill is a deeply disturbed serial killer whose gruesome crimes serve as the film's central mystery. While Lecter is all about calculated manipulation, Buffalo Bill is chaos personified, a terrifying reminder of the darker corners of human nature. Together, these two villains create a spectrum of psychological horror, with Lecter embodying intellectual dread and Buffalo Bill embodying visceral fear. And then there's the supporting cast, who plays a crucial role in shaping this oppressive atmosphere and really driving the narrative forward. First, we have Jack Crawford, played by Scott Glenn, as Clarice's mentor. Crawford is a key figure in her professional life. He provides both guidance and pressure. His belief in her potential motivates her, but his subtle underestimation of her also reflects the challenges she faces as a woman in this male-dominated field. Crawford's character also adds another layer of tension, because Clarice must constantly prove herself, not just to Lecter or Buffalo Bill, but also to her own mentor. Then there's Dr. Frederick Chilton, the smug, self-serving administrator of the asylum where Lecter is imprisoned, played by the always smarmy Anthony Heald. He's just this arrogant, incompetent person that really make him more of an irritant to both Clarice and us in the audience. But I think more than the irritation, he amplifies the oppressive atmosphere of Lecter's confinement. His lack of understanding and his constant attempts to exploit Lecter for personal gain add extra layers of tension, and they make the asylum feel like a more dangerous place even before Lecter's presence. And you can't overlook Catherine Martin, Buffalo Bill's latest victim. Although she spends much of the film as a captive, her character adds urgency and emotional stakes to the story. Catherine's determination to survive really mirrors Clarice's own resilience, creating a subtle parallel that underscores the film's themes of transformation through adversity. And I always like to mention when I talk about this movie, I really enjoy seeing Frankie Faison as Barney. I don't know, something about Frankie just puts a smile on my face, so I want to make sure to call him out. And then the cameo by Chris Isaac. If you're a music person, you know what I'm talking about. But the brilliance of Silence of the Lambs lies in how all of these characters interact. Clarice, Lecter, Buffalo Bill, and the entire supporting cast, no one is just an individual. They're all a piece of a larger psychological puzzle. Each character serves a purpose, either challenging or reinforcing Clarice's resolve. And this intricate web of relationships is what really makes the film not just a horror story, but a deeply psychological experience. By the end of the film, we're left with an unforgettable exploration of power, fear, and the human psyche. These characters, they stick with us, but not just because of what they do, but because of how they make us feel. And in a film like this, that's where the true hallmark of greatness lands. When it comes to Silence of the Lambs, the film is much more than just a psychological thriller. This is a layered masterpiece brimming with symbolism and subtext that really deepen its impact. So let's take a closer look at how these visual metaphors, psychological underpinnings, and social commentary really elevate this story from just a minor horror flick to a truly enduring work of art. First, one striking visual motif in the film is the recurring imagery of moths, specifically the death's head hawk moth. These insects are not just an eerie aesthetic choice. They're a powerful symbol of transformation. For Buffalo Bill, the moth represents his twisted desire to transform himself, albeit through horrifying and violent means. He sees himself as the moth, shedding one identity to become another, no matter the cost. On the other hand, the moth also mirrors Clarice's journey. While Buffalo Bill seeks physical transformation, Clarice undergoes a psychological one. She starts as a determined but inexperienced FBI trainee, navigating a world that constantly underestimates her. By the end of the film, she emerges stronger, more confident, and more resilient, having faced not only external threats, but also her own inner demons. The moth then becomes a dual symbol, one of grotesque obsession and one of personal growth. And now we all know Silence of the Lambs is a story about the human mind, fears, insecurities, and the battles we fight within ourselves. But nowhere is this more evident than in the interactions between Clarice and Dr. Lecter. Lecter is not just a character, he's almost a mirror that reflects back the deepest fears and vulnerabilities of anyone who's speaking to him. For Clarice, Lecter's probing questions force her to confront her childhood trauma, the death of her father and the haunting memory of the lambs. And these moments aren't just psychological mind games. They're symbolic of the internal battles we all face. Clarice's journey to silence those screaming lambs isn't just about solving a case. It's now about finding her own peace, her own validation, and above all, her own strength. Lecter himself is symbolic as well. Despite his monstrous actions, he represents a twisted form of intellect and control. His ability to see through people, to unearth their deepest truths, highlights how easily our fears and insecurities can be manipulated if we're not vigilant. And beyond its psychological depths, The Silence of the Lambs also offers a sharp critique of societal dynamics, particularly regarding gender. The film is unflinching in its portrayal of Clarice's struggles as a woman in the male-dominated field of the FBI. From the subtle condescension of her peers to the overt leers of strangers, Clarice is constantly navigating a world that doubts her capabilities simply because she's a woman. There's a memorable scene that underscores this scene when Clarice enters the room full of male officers. Their collective gaze makes her presence feel like it's an intrusion. And these moments aren't just about her challenges, they're about the broader obstacles faced by women in similar environments. Yet somehow Clarice's journey becomes one of empowerment. She doesn't just survive, she thrives, proving her competence and resilience in the face of the challenges. And I think in this way, the film becomes a story of defiance and strength, making it as much about empowerment as it is about that horror. In the film, every visual and narrative element serves a purpose. From the symbolic transformation that we talked about with the moth, to the psychological mazes explored through Lecter and Clarice's interactions, to the commentary on gender dynamics. I didn't even touch the whole idea of Buffalo Bill. The film is a masterclass in layered storytelling. These themes are what make it resonate so deeply, and I think it's why it continues to captivate audiences still 24 years later or so. Now let's talk about Silence of the Lambs' most masterful elements, its pacing and plot structure. If there's one thing this film does brilliantly, and let's be honest, it does everything it does brilliantly, but if we just focused on one, it's the way it keeps us utterly riveted from start to finish. Jonathan Demme and the creative team knew exactly how to balance the slow burn tension of a psychological thriller with sudden, pulse-pounding moments of action and revelation. Now, in all actuality, The Silence of the Lambs is a slow burn thriller. It takes its time building suspense, letting us immerse ourselves in the mind of the characters. Every scene between Clarice and Lecter feels like a psychological chess game, with each move and countermove carefully calculated. The film never rushes these moments. They're given the space they need to breathe, and it allows the tension to begin to simmer just beneath the surface. And yet the pacing never feels sluggish. The investigation into Buffalo Bill's crimes, the mounting pressure on Clarice to succeed, and the stakes rising with every victim keep the momentum always moving forward. There's a rhythm to the way the film alternates between quiet, unsettling moments and bursts of intense action, such as the daring escape of Hannibal Lecter or the climactic showdown in Buffalo Bill's basement. This dynamic keeps us on edge, never knowing when the next jolt of adrenaline might hit. And a gripping aspect of the plot are its twists and turns. Every interaction between Lecter and Clarice peels back a new layer of the story. Lecter isn't just providing these cryptic clues about Buffalo Bill, he's also unraveling Clarice's own psyche, exposing her insecurities and traumas in a way that really feels invasive and revealing. Then there's the twist that happens in Buffalo Bill's basement. It's this wonderful work of editing and storytelling. Just when you think you've pieced together what's happening, the film pulls the rug out from under you. And the sequence where Clarice realizes she's in the killer's home, juxtaposed with the FBI storming the wrong house, well, that's a moment of pure cinematic genius. The suspense at this point is unbearable as we watch Clarice, alone and unprepared, face down one of the most terrifying villains in film history. And the ending is just as satisfying as it is chilling. On one hand, it provides closure for Clarice's journey. She's faced her fears, proven herself, and brought a dangerous killer to justice. But on the other hand, the film leaves us with an ominous sense of unease as Lecter escapes custody. That final phone call, with Lecter calmly telling Clarice that he won't come after her while ominously stalking Dr. Chilton, is unforgettable. It's a conclusion that feels earned, but it leaves the door open, amplifying the psychological impact of everything we just experienced. And by the time the credits roll, we're left with a sense of both relief and dread. Relief that Clarice's story has reached its resolution, but dread that Lecter is still out there, free to continue his horrifying games. This is a perfect balance of closure and ambiguity, and it makes Silence of the Lambs impactful. This becomes a film that stays with you. It gnaws at the edges of your mind. It's just a wonderfully orchestrated work with how everything comes together. Now let's take a moment to talk about the incredible impact and legacy of Silence of the Lambs. Because it didn't just leave its mark on psychological horror, it carved out a permanent place in cinematic history. So first, when it comes to redefining psychological horror, The Silence of the Lambs set a new standard. Before this film, the genre often relied heavily on gore, jump scares, and supernatural elements to elicit fear. But Demme's masterpiece showed that the true terror could come from within the human mind. It blended the suspense of a crime thriller with the introspection of a psychological drama, proving that horror didn't have to be loud or overt to be unsettling. And its influence is undeniable. You can see its fingerprints all over films like David Fincher's Seven, which adopted a similarly dark and cerebral tone while exploring the mind of the killer, and we just featured that film a couple of episodes back. And even TV series like Mindhunter and Hannibal, the latter directly inspired by Lecter's character, owe a debt to this film's groundbreaking approach. These works don't just explore the actions of killers. They dive right into their psychology, following the trail of The Silence of the Lambs and what it blazed for us. And let's not forget how this film helped elevate the intelligent horror subgenre. It opened the door for more complex, character-driven stories in a genre often dismissed as lowbrow. Critics and audiences alike were captivated. It's rare for a horror film to gain universal acclaim, let alone dominate the awards circuit. But Silence of the Lambs shattered expectations. At the 64th Academy Awards, it won the 5 major Oscars. Again, that was Best Picture, Director, Actor, Actress, and Adapted Screenplay. A feat that's been achieved by only a handful of films in history. And this wasn't just any win. It was a horror movie taking home the industry's top honors, helping to legitimize a genre that long had been overlooked by mainstream critics. I think it still is to much of the degree, but this did help to start knocking that wall down. And the film's success wasn't just about the awards. It struck a chord with viewers because it was so much more than a simple thriller. I mean, like we talked about, it explored themes of vulnerability, power dynamics, and the blurred lines between good and evil in a way that felt deeply human. Audiences weren't just scared, they were fascinated, even mesmerized by the depth of the story and the complexity of the characters. And I think another point for audiences was the fact that just recently in history before this film, we had seen the capture of John Wayne Gacy. There was the capture of Ted Bundy, both being executed in the years right around this, just after. And 4 months after this film came out, Jeffrey Dahmer is caught. Adding to that, there's a lot of parallels between those killers and what they were doing and what this film touched on as audiences. Now, over the years, The Silence of the Lambs has really become a touchstone for fans of psychological and intelligent horror. Few films can claim such lasting cultural resonance. The dynamic between Clarice and Lecter is now legendary, and the storytelling is both terrifying and strangely intimate. This is the rare horror film that non-horror fans will go to, and they'll watch, and they'll see a lot of horror elements, but masked as a thriller. Hannibal Lecter, the portrayal by Anthony Hopkins, is particularly iconic. Despite only ever being on the screen for about 16 minutes, Hopkins created a character so chilling and so unforgettable that he became the face of psychological horror. Lecter's eerie politeness, his sharp intellect, and unsettling calm have made him one of the most celebrated villains we've ever seen. Meanwhile, Jodie Foster's Clarice became equally legendary. She wasn't your typical horror protagonist. She was smart, resourceful, and human. Her vulnerability and determination resonated, made her a symbol of strength in the face of fear. Together, these two characters in particular elevated Silence of the Lambs into the realm of cinematic legend. And it's a film that horror fans can hold close to their hearts, not just for its scares, but for its intelligence and emotional depth, and say, look, even horror films can be smart and important. To this day, The Silence of the Lambs remains the gold standard for psychological horror. It's studied in film school, it's referenced in pop culture, revered by fans and filmmakers alike. It didn't just redefine what a horror film could achieve, it proved that the genre could be both terrifying and thought-provoking, paving the way for future masterpieces, like Hereditary, for example, or The Witch, movies that rely more on intellectual themes and thought than just straight-out gore and horror, though there's a place for those as well. This is more than a film. It is a true cultural phenomenon that continues to inspire and influence over 3 decades later. I mean, 1991, that was 34 years ago. And that's the true mark of a classic. As we wrap up this dive into The Silence of the Lambs, it's clear why this film remains a masterpiece of psychological horror and cinematic storytelling. This is an experience, and it's one that leaves its mark on its viewers. The film is as close to perfect blend of psychological depth, unsettling horror, and artistic excellence, seamlessly weaving together its characters, the themes, and execution into a tapestry of terror and intrigue. So let's start with what makes it so extraordinary. Well, its strengths. The performances are iconic. Anthony Hopkins delivering that portrayal of Dr. Hannibal Lecter that is both mesmerizing and horrifying. Like we said, in that about 16 minutes of screen time, Hopkins crafts a character so indelibly terrifying that his presence is felt throughout the entire film. And Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling provides the perfect counterbalance. Her vulnerability and determination make her one of the most relatable and inspiring protagonists in film history. Then there's the writing. Ted Talley's screenplay, adapted from Thomas Harris's novel, is razor sharp. Every word, every line of dialogue feels deliberate. It drips with tension and subtext. Lecter's chillingly poetic musings and Clarice's heartfelt confessions create a dynamic that is intellectually engaging, but still very terrifying. And you can't forget the direction. Demme's choices elevate the material from the intimate close-ups that force us to confront the character's emotions to the carefully orchestrated pacing that keeps us on edge. The interplay between sight and sound, the way the camera lingers maybe just a second too long, the unnerving silence punctuated by unsettling sounds, all contribute to a feeling of unease that never really dissipates. The themes explored in this film also contribute to its brilliance. Power dynamics, gender roles, trauma, and the nature of evil are all tackled with nuance. Clarice's journey isn't just about catching a killer. It's about overcoming her own fears and proving herself in a world that constantly underestimates her. Hannibal, for all his monstrosity, forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature, intellect, and morality. Now, let's address the weaknesses, but honestly, they're hard to find. If there are any flaws here, they're so minor that they hardly detract from the film's overall impact. There are some things I've read about the Buffalo Bill character maybe being insensitive to the LGBTQIA plus world, and that very well could be. I'm not a part of that world, so I don't know. And if it is, I would love someone to reach out and let me know. But just looking for flaws, that's one that I think I've seen. Some viewers might find the overall psychology, the intensity, and the subject matter just too dark. But for a psychological horror film, I think these elements are more features than bugs or weaknesses. So what's my rating? This is a resounding 10 out of 10. As I said, this film is the gold standard for psychological horror and thrillers. This is a must-watch, not just for fans of the genre, but for anyone who appreciates intelligent, thought-provoking cinema. If you've somehow never seen Silence of the Lambs, let me be crystal clear. This is essential viewing. Whether you're drawn to the psychological cat-and-mouse game between Lecter and Starling, the chilling exploration of the human mind, or the masterful filmmaking, this is a movie that will stay with you. So grab the movie, find it, it's streaming, turn off the lights, settle in, and let it pull you into its dark, unsettling world. But don't say I didn't warn you. This film has a way of getting under your skin and staying there. Okay, well that's going to wrap up our deep dive into Silence of the Lambs. And like I said, it's a film that continues to haunt us with its psychological complexity and unforgettable performances. If you found yourself captivated by my discussion, I want to hear from you. Your thoughts, your interpretations, and your favorite moments from the film are always welcome. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing to Real Talk Horror Edition. And if you're feeling extra generous, drop me a review. It really helps the show reach other horror lovers just like you. And of course, don't forget to follow us on social media. I love engaging with listeners, whether it's Twitter at Real Talk Pod, I guess it's X now, Instagram, Threads, and Blue Sky at Real Talk. Email therealrealtalk@gmail.com. Let's keep the conversation going. And seriously, if you have some insight on the LGBTQ plus community and their feelings on the Buffalo Bill character, please educate me, reach out, let me know. I'm genuinely curious. And I would love to feature some listener comments in upcoming shows. Use you as my experts as I break down these wonderful films. Now, as we continue our journey through trauma and transformation, next time we're going to take a look at the 2000 psychological thriller, The Cell. Now, it's a surreal, visually stunning film that dives into the mind of a serial killer in a way that I don't think we had ever seen before. So make sure you tune in for that. It's going to be a wild ride. Until then, stay curious, stay haunted, and always keep it real.
Creeping through the silence dark, whispers in the midnight park. The night is cold, there's no escape. Ghostly figures take their shape. Others play a twisted game. Fear and terror stake their claim. Footsteps follow close behind. Haunting thoughts invade your mind. Run away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll always stay. Windows rattle, doors they creak. Ghostly whispers start to speak. Every corner hides a fear. Close your eyes, they're drawing near. Candles flicker, spirits call. In the night they'll take it all. Midnight strikes, the clocks rewind. Nightmares now are intertwined. They'll away, but they won't go. In the darkness, fear will grow. Midnight shadows come to play. In your dreams, they'll always stay.